but we'll talk about it a little bit. But honestly, folks, the problem is all these swine of both parties. The main problem, the ultimate problem, is they've got something to lose. They've all got something to lose. What they have to lose is their re-election. They have to lose their re-election, which to guys like you and me means, oh, I'll have to find another job. I've been working gigs my whole life, but not for the people that go to Washington, because the people that go to Washington not just for a salary, but they go to Washington so people go, Mr. Or the great senator from the great state of this and your majesty, and they get cars and they get security and they get bowed and scraped, and people come up to them and ask them for favors, and they're powerful in their little fiefdoms, and they just dig it, man. They dig this adoration and they dig the power, and we're going to have problems in Washington as long as the people who go to Washington do it for the admiration and the power. I have an old school theory about this. Many people say, what amendments do you think we need? I don't think we need really any amendments, honestly. If we just followed the Constitution as it was written, we wouldn't be in this trouble. But I will say this, if I did have a chance to put in one amendment, I would put in this amendment. My amendment would be this: no one can be consecutively reelected to a position that they once. You know what? I take the consecutive out too. Screw it. Why make it more difficult than it needs to be? No one can be reelected to a political office that they have once held, which means that if you are the congressional representative to the House of Representatives from the 16th Congressional District of California, congratulations. You do 2 years, and at that point you come home and you go back to work. Now, if you want to run from the 18th District, or if you want to run for senator, or if you want to move to Louisiana and try and run there, or if you want to run for governor or president, fantastic, up or out, like in the military. But why should you get a chance to be reelected? Just think about this for a second. If you were, forget term limits. People say, term limits, how many terms? One. That's the obvious answer. If you're going to limit terms, there's your obvious answer. You're going to limit terms, your term limit is 1. You go once. This entire theory of government is predicated on the idea that the American people would send representatives. Remember, one person represents 30 million people. It's not that quite that much, but it's an incredible number, right? To go and speak for them and think for them and vote for them and do what they want for them. And so the closer that person is to the community that launched them to Washington, the better the system works. So what you're really saying is, what I'm saying is, no re-election. Think about that. If you had a tremendous public figure, I mean an out-of-the-park, crazy great public figure, you run as a representative, then you could have him as your senator, then he could go on to be your governor, then he could go on to be president. Fantastic. He's got all the experience in politics. He has to do a great job. What does that mean? That means he has to be a good lieutenant. And if he's a good lieutenant, then they'll make him a captain. If he's a good captain, they may trust him with the gold oak leaf, so they may make him a major. And if he's a really outstanding major, they might make him a light colonel. Or if he's unbelievably good, if he's 1 in 1,000, he'll be full colonel. If he's 1 in 100,000, he'll be a one-star general. And if the guy is the best living guy in his trade, he'll be a 4-star, maybe even a 5-star. If he's historical, he'll be a Grant, or he'll be an Eisenhower or something. He'll be a 5-star. Works. The system works. So what you're really saying when people say, oh, by the way, we can't do that. We can't deprive the great republic of this incredible man or woman. Why not? Why not? There's 320 million people in America, and only 535 of them live in a democracy. The rest of us, send them to go and live in this tiny little democracy of 535 people. You're telling me that we can't find 435 people every 2 years to go and do this job better than the clowns that are there now? Honestly? Really? I disagree with that premise. This is the greatest guy ever. Fantastic. Run him for senator then. Run him as governor. Run him as president. 1 term, and that's all. And that includes president too. Because if you look at the history of presidents we like and presidents we don't like. They get everything done in the first half of the first term. And the second term of just about every president, including Reagan, is just an ongoing ego boost. I got reelected. Congratulations. Nothing happens in the second term. All of the ideas that got the guy elected in the first place are implemented in the first half of the first term. So I want somebody to make the case to me that there are not 435 Americans capable of doing this job out of 320 million every 2 years. Nonsense. I don't care if they're doing a great job. Most of them don't do a great job. But think about the consequences of this radical idea. Okay, if you had this policy of no re-elections, none. No incumbency. There's no incumbency. Imagine that for a second. Just take a look at it on a basic level. If there's no incumbency, three things happen. First of all, you're always getting fresh blood. You're getting people who are out there responding to the economic realities, the technical realities, the changes in society, the social realities of this year and last year, not of 30 years ago, like some of these clowns who've been in there. So you get actually what the system is designed for: fresh information, fresh blood, fresh ideas, fresh feedback from the world comes to Washington. So you get that. The second thing you get is you get away from these people that need to make a career out of it because they can't do anything else. You don't get a career out of it. You want if you can slick people out of getting to vote for you once and you go to Washington, congratulations, you do your damage, you go home. Now it gets really interesting when you realize that if there's no re-election, then that means that an actual representative does his job unfiltered by the fact that most representatives spend most of their terms either fundraising or campaigning for a second or a third or an eighth or 20th term. There is no more terms. Go to Washington, do your job, come home. Another thing that happens is the power of lobbyists is almost completely broken for two reasons. Number one, the candidate doesn't need the money in order to get reelected because he can't be reelected. So the need of the candidate for the money is out, and the lobbyists don't have a smart play anymore. Right now, if a lobbyist puts hundreds of $1,000s into a guy's campaign, even if it's for a representative, he's betting that if he can get this guy elected once, then his chances of getting reelected are excellent. Excellent. Really good. I don't know what the incumbency reelection rate is. It's in the high 80s, maybe in the 90s, I think. I may be wrong about that, but it's well above 50%. So now the lobbyists don't have the inclination, or the incentive is the word I was looking for, to buy candidates because they're not buying them for 20 years. They're buying them for 2 years. And the guy doesn't need the money. And the other thing I would do is I would raise the salary. I'd pay every single congressman $1 million a year. You get $2 million, serve for 2 years, get $2 million. That's $1 million a year for 435 representatives. That's $500 million a year. It's $500 million. $1 million a year means you might actually get some people who are halfway decent. You might get people who could afford to give up their business for a year or two on that salary. And it also, again, if you're paying them $1 million a year, which is chump change compared to what we're spending, then it also reduces their dependency on corruption and influence peddling in order to pay their bills. And maybe you make it $3 million a year for a senator or something like that. And then a senator, no, you don't get to go back. Robert Byrd served 52 years in the Senate. When Robert Byrd left the Senate, he was in the Senate 6 months before I was born. Robert Byrd got to the Senate when there was no touch-tone phones, no color television, forget the internet. I don't even know if we'd gotten off of telegraphs when Robert Byrd became a senator. And he's making decisions for the rest of us? 1/50th? He's making 1/50th of the decisions for this country, this guy? No. I think a politician who went to the American people with this plan would be awesome, because what he's basically saying is, hey, folks, first person who's going to take this dive is moi, right? The first person who's going to be term limited out of office is me and the rest of us, because I'm bringing this proposal in. I think that'd be unbeatable. Common sense. Yes, exactly, Wes Walker. It's all about common sense. What the common sense resistance is about is not about Republican or Democrat or liberal conservative. It's about common sense. Think about it. No more incumbency. No more incumbency. Now, the incumbent would have some power, and his power would be the power to anoint a successor. That's not yes, and by the way, I'm looking at the comments, and no pensions either, by the way. That's right. You do 2 years, congratulations. You made $1 million a year. Please spend it wisely, or don't. Your business. We're not paying you for the rest of your life, right? Goodbye. Thanks for your service. Goodbye. We don't have any problem doing this with jury duty, right? Do you want, by the way, a professional jury class? How do you feel about that? How would you feel about, rather than having your trial on your life being drawn randomly from a group of citizens from your community, how would you feel if you were on trial for your life and you went out there and you went to a professional jury? You went to people whose only job was to be a jury, and they were paid $8 a day, let's say. So you got the $8 a day crowd to be your jury. And all they did was every day they go in there and adjudicate cases. Here's your $22 a day. You're a professional juryman. Don't you see how skewed and how disgusting that would be? How awful that would be? Well, it's what we have now. We have a professional Congress. I'd bump them all out of office. I'd move them up or out. And then I would say to the American people, God knows there's room for the rest of you. And since we're turning this thing over so fast, there's no more power of the incumbents. You've got a chance for decent people to actually say, you know what, I'm tired of the potholes in Bakersfield, California, and I'm trying to go to the state and they won't do anything about it. So I'm going to give up my semi-successful dry cleaning company in which I have 4 stores in the greater Bakersfield area. I'm going to put it aside for 2 years. I'm going to go to Washington, make $1 million a year, which is a pay cut for me, but I'll do it, and I'll come back. It's grand, and I think it can be. I think who's going to say no to this? Politicians are going to say no. Is anybody in the American people going to say no? What you're really doing is you're really basically saying to the American people, we trust you more than we trust them. And that's what really is going on out there now. I'm seeing I don't want to play politics anymore, folks. The whole purpose of this post-election game for me is to get out of politics. This isn't really politics. This is morality. This is common sense. This isn't like trying to get our guys over the hump or pathways to 270. Now we're going to play the game differently. We're going to reinvent the game. So reinventing the game means no re-election. What a radical idea that is. Beautiful, simple, clean, and so what's your problem? Why don't you like it? Is it because you want to stay in power for the rest of your life? I don't blame you, but we're not going to play that game anymore. Anyway, that was bounced off of the fiscal cliff and the scoundrels of both parties that got us into trouble out there. So moving on.